I also mentioned this component lifecycle in the last lecture. What is the component lifecycle? The first important takeaway is it's only available in class-based components. You will actually learn that functional components, when using React hooks, have an equivalent, you could say, but generally it's only available in class-based components, that lifecycle. And I will show you both, of course, the lifecycle and the functional component equivalent in this module. So let's start with the class-based lifecycle. We got these methods, which we can add to any class-based component, and React will execute them for us. And they will run at different points of time, and we can do different things with them to, for example, fetch data from the web or to do some cleanup work before a component is removed from the DOM. But how exactly can we use them, and in which order do they execute? Let's start with the component lifecycle during the component creation, because we actually have to differentiate between lifecycle hooks that run whenever something changes in our component, some props for example, and the lifecycle that runs when a component is rendered for the first time, because it's rendered as part of a list or because we only conditionally show it. So when a component is created, then first of all, the constructor executes. Now, this is actually not a React lifecycle hook. Instead, it's a default ES6 class feature. The important thing there is this constructor will receive the props of this component, and you have to call super props in the constructor. Only if you add it, so you don't have to add it just to make that call. It's done for you if you don't add it. But if you add your own constructor where you want to execute your own logic, you need to call super props in there. And I'll show you all of that in action right after these slides here, no worries. Now, what is the constructor there for? You can do it for basic initialization work, for example, for setting an initial state. What you shouldn't do here is cause side effects. Now, the word side effect is relatively abstract. In the end, it means things like sending a HTTP request, or storing something in your local storage of the browser, or sending some analytics to Google Analytics. You don't really want to do things like that in the constructor, because that can impact performance and cause unnecessary re-render cycles, which of course are pretty bad and you want to avoid. After the constructor, getDerivedState from props runs. That is a lifecycle hook that was added with React 16.3. And in the end, the idea here is that whenever your props change for your class-based component, you can sync your state to them. And that will actually be very rare niche cases. Let me be very honest. You'll not use that lifecycle hook a lot. But if you have some scenario where props of your component can change, and then you want to update some internal state of that component, then this is the hook to use. And I will show you how that hook works as well. Now, what you shouldn't do in there still is causing side effects. Don't send HTTP requests in that hook. There are better places for that. Now, after these two hooks, the render method executes. We already know that. That is the method that returns JSX. And that is really its job. You should use it only to prepare the data as you need it to lay out your JSX code and to render the HTML code, so to say. What you still shouldn't do in there is send HTTP requests or set any timeouts, so nothing which can block this rendering process. Now, when render runs, and you do render any other React components in this class-based component, then these child components will now be rendered. So every child component you included in your rendered component here will then be rendered as well. And only once all child components were rendered and their lifecycle hooks finished, your lifecycle hook here will finish for the creation when Component.mount gets called. Component.mount is a very important lifecycle hook, which you'll use a lot when you're working with class-based components, because here you can cause side effects. That is a typical hook you would use for making an HTTP request to get new data from the web. What you shouldn't do in here is update this state. So don't call setState in here unless it's in, let's say, the then block of a promise after you sent an HTTP request. But don't call setState in here synchronously. So you can definitely set up some code that executes in the future, which then updates the state. For example, when the response from the server is back, but don't do it right away when Component.mount runs that you immediately call setState, because that will trigger a re-render cycle, and that is bad for performance. Let's have a look at this in practice.